And tonight, it's so perfect from speaking out of what Amy was just describing. Um, every week when I am scheduled to give a Dharma talk at SFI, I get an email that says, "What's your topic?" And this week, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to talk about. This is my last Dharma talk of 2022, and I was just kind of stumped. And so the emails came in and they went out, and I actually at some point tried to come up with a topic that was broad enough that I could just say whatever I wanted because I couldn't figure out what I was going to say. um, and then last night I was at dinner with some friends and I described my dilemma, like, what should I say? And they were asking me questions about, what's kind of lit up in me, um, that I would want to share. And some of you know, the last time I was here, I did a kind of slideshow video presentation about my trip to Bhutan. And every time I described my time there, and people would ask me about it, I heard myself describing the place itself as a field of love. There was this field of love that was created for these young girls in Bhutan where they were being raised, essentially, in the Dharma. And there it was, my topic. And I thought, oh, I want to talk tonight about love, which is, of course, absolutely central to the Dharma, uh, and is really the center of all spiritual practice and all of spiritual life. But what is it? I had a conversation with a client a week ago or so, and she had just come from spending a week with a beloved friend who was in the hospital with undergoing treatment for cancer. And she, as we talked about her experience at the end, she said something to me like, it's really extraordinary that she had spent this week in the midst of what she described as these two great mysteries, which are the mystery of life and death and the mystery of love. Because as she talked about her time with her friend, there was nothing really that she could do for her so much except love her. And it was so beautiful to hear her expression of that and to feel with her, as I feel in myself, this enormous mystery of our human experience of love. So I'm saying that up front because I don't want to pretend that I know what love is. But I do want to talk about it because it's so important to us, for us, and as an invitation for us to really pay attention to and bring love forward in our practice, in our relationships, in our lives, to the best of our ability. Some of you know this famous phrase from the Buddha, who said, hatred never ceases from hatred. From love alone does hatred cease. This is the eternal law, the eternal rule, the eternal truth. And some of you who know me and have read my book, which is primarily memoir, may know or remember that at a very pivotal point in my own practice, I went to visit this Tibetan healer, Tibetan doctor, And I came to the conversation with um, this deep wish to be fixed, to be cured, to be healed. And for me, that in particular was in relationship to having at that point lived with type 1 diabetes for maybe 20 years at that point. And I was quite sure that I was broken and I wanted some help. And the conversation was a surprise. In other words, this doctor healer didn't tell me what I was expecting to hear. What he said to me was not, here's what you should do to take care of yourself. What he said to me was, the most important thing for you is to love yourself completely. And in many ways, that phrase has served as a kind of koan for me for the last 30 plus years of my practice. At the time when he said it, I actually was a little bit annoyed because I really wanted him to tell me what to do, and I had no idea what he was talking about. I didn't know how to do what he said. And in some ways, I think in the course of my own decades now of practice, there's been kind of an incremental understanding over time of what that means, of how to do what he asked me to do. And I think that for many of us, there is confusion about what love is. So recognizing that, yes, it is a mystery, but in our usual Western way, we have kind of, in a certain way, dumbed it down, you know. We've turned love into a Hallmark card that is something like an emotion. We've turned love into a feeling. And part of what I think I've learned over these years, decades really, is the deepening of the mystery of love, but also the deepening of the understanding of the power of love. That love is not, you know, butterflies and rainbows, that it is a potent, potent force. I have a quote from Maya Angelou, who said, "Love recognizes no barriers. It jumps hurdles, leaps fences, penetrates walls, and arrives at its destination full of hope." So this is, for me, a description of not love as a feeling, but love as a force. And I'll say more about this as I go. Of course, in Buddhist teaching, we have the sort of this balance of the insight teachings, the wisdom teachings, with what we know as the Brahma Viharas, these qualities of the heart of loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And these are, in some ways, sadly, often kind of a corollary teaching. There's the practice of meditation and insight, and then there's this other thing. So they're often kind of off to the side rather than understanding them as central. And I don't know that that was the way the Buddha taught it. I doubt it, actually. But it is somehow the way that it's come down to us. And there is, I think, a need for us to balance, kind of recalibrate these, what are sometimes called two wings of the bird, the wisdom wing and the love or compassion wing. There's a story from the Zen tradition that I've also practiced in the Soto Zen tradition, which was founded by Dogen Zenji, who is a 13th century Japanese monk, philosopher, poet. And the story is that as when Dogen was dying, he was preparing to pass on his kind of acknowledgement or um, uh, giving over his teaching to his main disciple. And he had this beloved disciple whose name was Tetsu Gikai. And he said, and I imagine he said with some difficulty to Tetsu Gikai, you know, you understand all of the Dharma. Tetsu Gikai was a sharp guy who was very, very, very smart and very devoted, had studied quite thoroughly. But Dogen said, but I can't pass on the sort of mantle of the teaching to you until you cultivate what he called ro bai shin. Shin is heart mind, and ro bai is the word for grandmother. So until you fully cultivate what he called grandmotherly mind, which is this mind of great compassion. And fortunately, the story has a happy ending because Tetsu Gikai, perhaps like me, with the Tibetan doctor, healer who I met with, Tetsu Gikai really initially didn't understand. But he knew that what Dogen was saying to him was important. And so, again, I have some feeling of relating to his dilemma. He explored. He too went on to discover what would it mean to develop this heart, this tender heart of compassion, and to really recognize that it is as important as anything in our path, in our teaching, in our ability to wake up. I found this beautiful quote from Dr. King, Martin Luther King, who describes these three kinds of love, which are eros, which most of us know as kind of sensory love, romantic love. And then there is the quality of love that's called philia, which is sort of the love of friends and family. It's that quality of love. And then this third kind of love, which is called agape. And agape we might think of as spiritual love. It's a very vast kind of love, and it really points to what I'm trying to speak about. I think agape too, we could say, is a mystery. He talks about it this way. He says, in speaking of love, we are not referring to some sentimental emotion. It would be nonsense to urge people to love their oppressors in an affectionate sense. When we speak of loving those who oppose us, we speak of love which is expressed in the Greek word agape. Agape means nothing sentimental or basically affectionate. It means understanding, redeeming, goodwill for all. It is an overflowing love which seeks nothing in return. So for King, agape was the strength, the power of love that was needed to create a movement, to stand up in the face of oppression, to meet the real difficulty and inequity and harm that is also part of the world that we live in. Last night, I went for the second time to see a documentary film that I am proud to say was directed and produced by my son-in-law. And it's called Loudmouth. And the documentary is the story of Reverend Al Sharpton, who for many, many, many decades has sort of carried on King's work. And he's a very controversial figure. And the documentary doesn't shy away from the controversy. But I could feel the quality of that agape in the movement, not just in the person of Reverend Al, as they call him, but in the movement of meeting, racism, in meeting police brutality, in meeting systemic inequity in our world, that's the quality of love that's needed for that. And I will just say that because we actually flew to New York to see the opening of the film, which was featured at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York 6 months ago. And seeing it the second time, I kind of saw and heard new things that I hadn't seen the first time. And the thing that really stood out to me this time was somewhere toward the end of the film, Reverend Al says something that was really very extraordinary as someone who's been on the front lines, literally, for decades of this movement. He said, "Of course I'm optimistic. Don't tell me that things haven't changed. I've seen so much happen in these decades of work that he's done." And for someone who's been at the bedside, at the funerals, he's counseled, made a list of all the names of the families that he's counseled over the years. And for him to be able to come forward with that, it struck me that to have that degree of optimism and buoyancy, there has to be this foundation of love. Otherwise, we get hard, we get cynical, and that can happen. But this is why this love is so important. So a few more things I will say. There's a beautiful phrase in the Buddhist tradition from Ajahn Sumedho, who was a student of Ajahn Chah from the Thai forest tradition. And it's a very simple phrase. He says, "Love is wisdom's natural radiance." And I think this is so important to see the connection between wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and love, these two wings of the bird. Because really the idea in Buddhist teaching is that when we have wisdom, when we see things clearly, love is the natural response. When we see through our confusion, our delusion, our felt sense of separation, love is the only answer. And it's mysterious, right? So that doesn't mean it looks a particular way. But there's a story again in the Zen tradition of the figure, this bodhisattva of great compassion is called Avalokiteshvara, which literally means the one who hears the cries of the world. And some of you may have seen the images of Avalokiteshvara with this halo of arms all around. And there's a koan in the tradition in which someone is asked, how does the bodhisattva of compassion use her 100 arms and hands? In other words, what does compassion in action look like? And the response is very similar to Ajahn Sumedho. The answer is, it's just like reaching behind your head to adjust a pillow in the night. It's a natural response. When there's discomfort, dis-ease, distress, the natural response is we don't have to think about it, right? We do it in our sleep. That's how natural it is. We do it in the dark. We reach out and make an adjustment. That's how pervasive this quality of love, this quality of compassion is. And love, the power of love in this way is that it heals. I felt this so in such a potent way at this monastery where I was in Bhutan, because here was this 30 young girls who had come from such difficult circumstances, and they were so alive, so much joy, so much laughter, because they had been taken in and loved in this way. And we know this is, for me, sort of the punchline of my own evolution of understanding what love is, which I hope is not the end. I hope that my understanding will continue to grow and deepen. But it's the understanding that, as I said before, quoting Maya Angelou, love is not a feeling, it's a force. Love is that fabric that connects. And if we understand that our fundamental suffering, as is taught in Buddhism, there are different kinds of suffering, and the most primary kind of existential dukkha that we experience is what's called sankhara dukkha. And it's one way of understanding that is that sankhara dukkha is our felt sense of separation. It's the place in which we feel disconnected from ourselves, from our own bodies, our hearts, our minds. We feel separate from each other. We feel separate from the planet. And it's love that allows us to connect or reconnect. It's love that allows us to see that we aren't fundamentally separate, that we are fundamentally connected. And it is in this quality of love that we heal. Some of you have heard me tell this story of George Washington Carver, who was the son of enslaved people living in the South, and he grew up to become an amazing botanist and social revolutionary in a way, and brilliant scientist. He transformed how farming was done in the South. And as a little boy, he was not well enough to work in the fields. And he had this reputation in his community of having this amazing green thumb, that he could heal plants that were dying. He had this amazing ability to take care of them. And this beautiful story about him is that he created a little plant hospital behind his home in the woods. And the people in the community would bring their ailing plants to him and he would heal them. And so one day, one of the women said to him, "Little George, how do you do it? How do you heal these plants? What's your secret?" And he said, if you listen to things, and love them, they will reveal themselves to you. And this feels like, to me, essential meditation teaching. This is the essence of what we're up to when we sit. We are listening, we're tuning in, we're bringing our full attention with love. And in this way, our awareness practice and our metta, our loving kindness practice, are not separate. They go together. Because if we listen, but we don't listen with love, first of all, we're not going to hear very much. And also, we're probably not going to want to listen for very long. If we're listening with judgment, the whole thing kind of shuts down, right? But if we listen with love, we have revelation, we have insight, we have clear seeing. Our own heart and mind and body, the world itself, will reveal itself to us when we bring this quality of love, which is fundamentally this quality of understanding our deep connectedness, right? If we understand that our fundamental suffering is this feeling of separation, this rip in the cloth, right? And certainly we see that in our world today, in extreme, right? We see, can't even speak the same language. That's how. So what heals that? This great mystery called love. And so really my invitation to me and to all of us is to start to pay attention. First, to explore for ourselves, what is it? Who gives love? Who receives love? What is it that's exchanged? Sometimes I think this whole talk is just an excuse to read this poem. This is from Mary Oliver. Short poem. Seema is nodding because she, like me, has a little dog who she loves. Several, maybe. It's called Little Dog's Rhapsody in the Night. He puts his cheek against mine and makes small expressive sounds. And when I'm awake, or awake enough, he turns upside down, his forepaws in the air, and his eyes dark and fervent. Tell me you love me, he says. Tell me again. Could there be a sweeter arrangement? Over and over, he gets to ask. I get to tell. So love is a relationship. It's how we meet each other. And it's not always clear, is it? Who's giving and who's receiving? That's part of the mystery of love. And so part of the invitation is to start to notice. To notice when the heart lights up. To notice, as Amy was speaking about so beautifully at the beginning, when there's that impulse for generosity, which is a quality of love. And when you give, is that better or worse than when you receive? I think we're confused about this, but we can pay attention in our own experience and start to see. I will close before I take some comments, questions, reflections with it's a story poem that is a description of this, I would say actually this kind of combination of generosity and love. And I was reading it out loud to myself before earlier today, and I could barely keep myself from weeping. That's no pressure. You don't have to feel anything so strong, but it is a vision. I feel like this is a vision of what's possible when we pay attention and we bring this quality of love forward. It's called Gate 4A by Naomi Shihab Nye, who is a Palestinian American poet. She writes, wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal, after learning my flight had been delayed for 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of Gate 4A understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate 4A was my gate. I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing loudly, "Help!" The flight service person said, "Talk to her. What is her problem?" We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. I stooped to put my arm around the woman and spoke to her haltingly in Arabic. The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely, and she needed to be in El Paso for major medical treatment the next day. I said, "No, we're fine. You'll get there just a little later." "Who is picking you up? Let's give him a call." We called her son, and I spoke with him in English. I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and would ride next to her. Then she talked to him. Then we called her other sons, just for the fun of it. Then we called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they had 10 friends in common. Then I thought, for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? All of this took about 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling about her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She had pulled a sack of homemade mamul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts, out of her bag and was offering them to all the women at the gate. To my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo. We were all covered with the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. And then the airline brought out free beverages from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving us all apple juice, and they were covered in powdered sugar too. And I noticed my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag. Some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate once the crying of confusion had stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. So my hope is that these words tonight will remind us that we can impact the world that we're in, that this can still happen anywhere, that love can come forward, that not everything is lost.